Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So to get a quick sense, how many of you from Duluth? None. Okay. How many from the med school, School of Public Health? Okay. Okay. Education, CLA, CBS. Okay. Good.
College of Pharmacy.
College of Pharmacy. Welcome.
School of Nursing.
Okay. This is the first time as a team we're coming to this, so we want to keep this as open as possible. We are here to present primarily the structure of a program. It's been considered a unique program the way we've designed it and carried it forward, so I'm here to talk more about the structure and what we did. So to begin with, let's talk about the student expectations, because that's where we want to start always.
Hi, my name is Colin, and so I signed up for this study abroad because regrettably I wanted to gain a little bit of hands-on experience in the field of healthcare. But I read the description of the course, and it said we will be investigating what it takes to become a physician in a growing global market, and I immediately imagined myself scrubbing up and entering the Indian version of the show ER, working side by side with doctors, and learning what it takes to practice medicine abroad. But well, furthermore, I had known Dr. Prasad and Trisha Todd for quite some time, and I was very excited to see what they had in store for us in an abroad environment. I knew that they had challenged us intellectually for the past few years that I had been an undergraduate, and I was excited to see what they had in store for us abroad. So I approached this study abroad, this new adventure, with a completely misguided idea of what we will be doing abroad, which it turned out to be like a very unbelievable thing. I was unaware of how much this would change me as a person. And so yes, my initial response was, we're going to India. But as the date slowly loomed, my initial excitement soon turned to, oh my God, I'm going to India. And the idea of how was I going to handle the culture shock of being abroad, something that I had not really had not experienced in the past. Something as to, was I going to be outshined by my peers around me? There's 26, 27 other pre-med students. How was I going to fit into the whole concept of the group? And was I truly ready for this experience? And that's something that we'll investigate today. And with that, I'll hand it over to David.
So, like Colin, I was incredibly excited for this program, though perhaps for slightly different reasons. I had also known Dr. Prasad and Trisha Todd for a while, and they had been talking about this for a few years, and I was really, really hoping that they would do it before I graduated, so I'm glad it happened. Basically what it came down to for me was I was excited about the idea of a global future physician. What does it mean to have a globally oriented career in healthcare? And then additionally, a broader version of that question, what does it mean to have global social responsibility? And with that, I was excited for the program because I had heard a lot about SVYM, the organization that we're going to talk about a little bit, that we were partnered with there, and heard a lot about their projects. And so I was excited to see an example of something that worked in global health. I had spent the previous year studying abroad in Ecuador through the Minnesota Studies in International Development program, and this was a fantastic experience for me, but the program was very critically oriented. We spent a lot of time critiquing many of the development policies and programs that have a lot of pretty colonialist underpinnings and a lot of really severe problems with development. So here I am with this very critical perspective without much in the way of what works. And so that was why I was excited to do this.
So both David and Colin mentioned Trisha Todd. She's not here with us today. She's my co-conspirator in this program. I've known Trisha for a few years now. She's from the Health Career Center and from the School of Public Health, and we've taught a lot of classes together. So to give a little context of what we were developing, medical school entry is not the best. We know that. There's a lot of conversation around how people are getting into medical school who probably shouldn't be there. I see the products of that on the other side because I'm predominantly in residency education. So the two aspects of medical school entry are around the cognitive aspect, which is by the GPA and standardized tests like the MCAT, and then the non-cognitive aspect. And the non-cognitive aspect is very difficult to define because it's non-cognitive. And most of that is reflected by your personal statement and your interview. There are other medical schools in this country who are doing a fantastic job of doing individualized interviews, psychological profiling, and things like that, which we think is going to be the wave of the future. It's not here yet. So our perspective was, can we give something in our own fuzzy way, this non-cognitive aspect of giving the broader perspective of what it is to be a physician, what it is to be a global citizen, what it is to be in healthcare, and not just, you have the skills, so here you go. So that is part of the underpinnings of the development of some of our courses. So we started a series called the Future Physician series. It started in 2004. I've been here since 2007. I've been involved with the Future Physician series since 2007. And we started off in a very small way. We used to have about 25 students, predominantly freshmen, and we would talk to them about future physicians and what it is, and then bring some physicians to talk to them, and we probably scared a bunch of them. A lot of the 25, a good number of the 25 would drop out, saying they don't want to be a doctor anymore because it's tough. You have long days. And so we changed the structure a little more because we wanted to factor in the dropouts. And I don't mean dropouts in a bad way. Dropouts from the path to being a physician. Dropouts from, or making the decision that clinical medicine is not the way for me. Maybe it's public health. Maybe it's nursing. Maybe it's something else where my soul is. So that was the design of our program. So though we call ourselves the future physicians, we're very clear that our goal is to prepare people for health careers, the broad perspective. So currently we have this three-part program, with the fourth one being a global future physician program. The HS 1600 is medicine in the 21st century. It's a large class, about 200 students. We deliberately did that to look at the dropouts, so we have a less number the next time. Because there's a whole lot of people who come in and say, oh, I want to be a doctor. But when they talk about, oh, yeah, I have to study, I have to go to class, no, maybe not. So we want to factor in that. And then the HS 1601, which is missing from this list, actually it's the second one there, the life and work of a physician, is when we bring physicians from different fields and give them the perspective of what it is to be a physician, what they went through to become a physician, and their perspective of it. And there's a lot of reflection involved in that. And then 1602 is volunteer experiences here in the US, with an online community, with an action plan for medical school, if that's what you want, preparation for a personal interview and things like that. It's been a very successful program. About 75% of our folks who stick to the three courses end up in medical school, which is pretty high compared to most of the programs in the country. Most programs quote about a 40-45%. So maybe it's a selection bias. We get the best. So with this perspective, we decided that we need to do a little more. And like David was mentioning, we've had this conversation for a few years now. We've been talking about expanding the program where we can do more one-on-one. When we expanded from the 25 students to 200, what we lost was a personal touch. When, for example, David is a senior right now. When he was a freshman, we got to know every one of them because there's only 25. When it's 200, it's another face in the crowd. We lost that touch. So we wanted to get part of that, and part of it was also to expand it beyond the realms of a classroom, to look at practical models of what works, and put healthcare and clinical medicine in perspective in the larger picture of what development means. Where does it fit with education? Where does it fit with women's rights? Where does it fit with small-scale economic development? All this. So that was a plan of developing this course. One of the main things here was the concept of learning versus doing. And like Colin mentioned, there's a lot of what we call mission trips. The ethical nature of these mission trips has been questioned, and I question it all the time because I've been on the other end of it. Going to a third world country and dispensing blood pressure medicines for 2 weeks causes more problems, causes innumerable problems in a disruptive way, rather than making it a much more sustainable thing. So there is a movement within this country about trying to have a little more ethical standards around global health training. And the two groups, the Forum on Education Abroad for pre-health programs, and the second one, what's known as WAIT, which is a work group for ethics in global health training, have been talking about this a lot. And Tricia Todd, my partner in this, has been very involved in the WAIT program. And the essence of this is what's mentioned there. If you can't do it here in this country, you shouldn't be doing it elsewhere. And the excuses that come up, but they need us. But if we don't do this, who's going to do the laceration repair? I think that's the wrong message we're sending. We want to make it very clear that you're going in as learners, not as this hoity-toity, here I am, I can give you what I have, because I'm from the US. We did not want to encourage that practice at all. So, it's a custom program. Those were the two people. I was on contract from my department. I have to mention it because I'm happy that it contracted me. And the partnership with an organization called SVYM, Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, which was a local organization in India. And that's sort of a unique part of this because I have known this organization since 1985. It's one of the founding members of this organization. We started off when we were in med school, started off by doing exactly what we are now talking against, saying that here we are, med students, we can save the world. Nobody told us we couldn't. And I think all of us have been in that stage, the stage of high idealism, low practicality. That was the birth of our organization. But we have grown. We employ about 800 members right now. We work predominantly in the field of healthcare, but it's healthcare, education, development, and consultancy in policy matters. We run a few institutes in a city called Mysore in southern India. And the last 26 years of our existence, we've really evolved to be a nodal organization, a non-governmental organization, partnering with a lot of the government activities and affecting public policy. For me, this was personal because, well, it's my baby. It is also because I was seeing this, and I've mentioned this to others here. Folks from other universities were having programs at our organization, ongoing programs from Cornell, Harvard, and Iowa going there. So my first question was, why not us? Why not Minnesota? So one aspect of this was already solved. Residents from my program, from family medicine, have been going there and doing clinical work. They are licensed physicians in this country. They are licensed to do what they're doing. And they go there as clinicians, but they still function as learners. But the type of learning that is a little different because they are more hands-on. The experiential learning is a little more. So for pre-med students, we wanted to design it around the experience, the didactic component. The reason why I say this local organization was important was some of what we felt were really strong characteristics of the local organization. So very strong reputation in India. It has a history of doing education programs of various kinds. Week-long programs, 3-week-long programs, semester-long programs, and 2-year internships in the field of development. And programs from all over the world, not just India or the US, programs from the UK, Australia, and other places. So they've had the experience of doing that. Very good local faculty, faculty who have academic appointment in universities in India and in the US. They come here and give talks in many universities here. So that was another very strong part of this. And the fact that they had strong experience in healthcare, that's healthcare delivery, public health, public policy, development, education, all of the above. So it was a much more bigger buffet that we could use. Structure, didactics. Our students were thrilled. We are going to take you from Minnesota to go and sit in a classroom in India. So along with the didactics, we decided that we need to do something more. And that involved a lot of briefing and debriefing to put everything in context. That probably helped the most. Because if it was just the pure didactics, you could probably beam it to a classroom here, and it'll be less expensive than taking a bunch of students over to India. And then the second part, field trips. Colin mentioned about the culture shock. Our answer to that, understanding that ours is a very short program, is to take all the students and plonk them right in the middle of the busiest market in Mysore city on the day of arrival. The culture shock was deliberate and planned, because we didn't have time to go through the periods of culture shock and then go through an adjustment. It's a 3-week program. Let's do it quick. And I think that was a good way of doing it. At least I felt so. I have some photos. And to understand the perspective of healthcare delivery, we did go to a lot of the local hospitals. We went to a tribal hospital that we were running. I used to be the chief medical officer there 20 years ago, so I know the place quite well. A larger rural hospital, a district hospital in Mysore city, which was really eye-opening from the volume viewpoint and the pathology viewpoint. And then an ultra-modern hospital in Bangalore, which would rival any of the hospitals we see here in Minnesota, which is the type of hospitals that are being mentioned as, you need to go there to get care. So we got the whole spectrum, right from the small tribal hospital to the large rural hospital. And we didn't go there to work in the hospital. We went there to understand the healthcare delivery. None of the students worked in those hospitals. Then we had a bunch of cultural programs and visits to temples and architectural places around Mysore, primarily to give a context of what it means to be in this overall field of healthcare delivery. I'm going to stop talking right now. Colin?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, my goals were a little bit skewed coming into this. So you can imagine my confusion after sitting through the first 3 lectures that focused on philosophy and historical context of Hinduism and the Indian culture. It was the fact of the matter is that I, along with many of my fellow students, had never been immersed in a culture other than our own, let alone one on the complete other side of the world. And this is where I believe that the ingenious structure of the Global Future Physicians course seminar truly shined, as it built our foundation, our understanding of the Indian society from the ground up. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later. It started simple. We had a little bit of pre-trip homework where we compiled a list of do's and don'ts, things to do while in India. Things like eating only with your right hand and cleaning your plate after every meal, my personal favorites. But as upon arrival, the conversations became a little bit more complex, relating to topics that were current in understanding India as a whole. Things like religion, ethical practices of medicine, and it even reached gender-based abortions, gender-driven abortions, and the circular nature of life itself. We were not, and these discussions were not your normal run-of-the-mill undergraduate level discussions, as they were the debriefings that Dr. Prasad talked about earlier were completely driven by the general curiosity of the students. And each lecture contained a lengthy Q&A session where we were able to pick the brains of each professor that we met in India for upwards of sometimes an hour. So we were not learning directly in the hospitals, and we were not even being forced to learn at all. But each day was so intellectually intoxicating that we could not help but soak in every moment of the 3 weeks we spent in India. So with all that said, I'll try and summarize the what went well into 2 bullet points. The first being the cumulative structure of concepts. It was important that we understood the ideas of Hinduism, and that made the topics of death and some of the more advanced things that much more meaningful. And it helped us conceptualize the deliverance of healthcare in India. And in doing so, we began to think of the global perspective for the first time. And this is when the questions of why is this the case turned into what can we do to help in the future. And second was the intimate learning style. And the welcoming tone brought by Dr. Prasad and Trisha Todd wove its way through all the experiences that we had in India. And the combination of independent investigations, small group projects, debriefings, and general discussions engaged us in a variety of different formats that highlighted our individual strengths in a sea of many pre-med, many extroverted pre-med students. So when I look back at the Future Physicians program, I can now say that it far exceeded my expectations of what I thought it would be, and that I grew as my capacity to serve grew on a whole in a way that has nothing to do with my future aspirations of becoming a doctor. We all left to study healthcare and learn how to become a future physician. But when we came back, after studying different culture, I believe we all became global citizens, integrated in the vast growing community of the world. I feel like this experience has strengthened my understanding of the human nature, and I feel like more of a compassionate human being. And I'm truly happy to say that I was a guinea pig on this first run of the Global Future Physicians.
So, reflecting a little bit more on my pre-expectations for this program, I sort of came to realize that what I really wanted from this was easy answers to hard questions. And I sort of feel like I should have learned by now that that's just never really going to happen. So for me, instead, the great value of this program was that it built a community of students that could address these hard questions and really wrestle with them in a more like discussion-driven format. I'd like to re-emphasize the value of our debriefing sessions that we've already touched on. These really allowed us to tackle complex issues. We talked about the importance of understanding context. We spent a lot of time on the sort of not necessarily within the realm of healthcare, the context of India. We also wrestled with the idea of complexity and paradox and understanding how things are not necessarily black and white. They're not so simple. And then finally we talked about shoot, I'm blanking. I'm sorry. Basically, these are just examples of like the discussion-driven wrestling with issues that we talked about. And I saw great growth in myself and the other students, and I think I have some evidence of that from when we came back to the States, of how we were able to put these perspectives into practice. So I'm sure you're all familiar with, a couple weeks ago, the Konya 2012 video went viral. And everybody knows the story. There was a lot of initial excitement, and then a lot of critiques came out. But I was most excited about the way I saw my fellow students discussing this video and posting very mature analyses of it, and really trying to dig into a lot of the complex questions that this video raises. And so I'm really grateful for this program in that it developed this sort of community in which we can have those discussions. So, thank you.
We have a few more slides, but if you have any questions, please interrupt us anytime. Okay? These were some of the evaluations done by our local partner. I look at anything above satisfactory as great. I'm not in marketing, so I don't care. Things around room and accommodations. We have a hostel that everybody lived in. There were students from other places there too at the same time, so that was a good communal feel there. Field trips, much more fun than sitting in classrooms. So what worked well? I think the two faculty model worked really well. We've had discussions with GPS Alliance about the need for two faculty, and the practical side of this cannot be overemphasized. Part of the reason is we were taking 25 students. Part of the reason is we needed more perspective during the debriefing, and the richness really came out better because I think the two faculty could look at a student from two different angles and come back with the debriefing in a much more holistic way rather than, oh, I don't like you. That's why I said this is the way you should do it. The second part is planning a program inside out or outside in. We use this term primarily because I had a perspective of the program from the inside out, being there. And Trisha had a much more perspective of developing the curriculum around a program like this. So I think we met really well. So when I would talk about, the strengths of our organization, strengths of the local faculty, it was easy to fit it in. Or there were aspects that we were like, oh yeah, we would like to hear that, but no, that really doesn't answer our question. So it's easy for us to blend that well. It also helped that we had an added faculty who joined us at the last minute, and we could make time because it did fall well within our scope of what we were planning on. The last part, managing 25 extroverted predominantly, very competitive pre-med. I don't know if you folks realize this, pre-med students are probably the most competitive students you're ever going to get. Because once I get into med school, it's like, okay, fine, I'm here. I don't care anymore. But the pre-med part, watch out. So there's a lot of competition going on. So to take care of them, we divided the whole 25 group members into 5 teams and had a team leader. And the incentive was that would go on their CV that they were team leader. We did some extra training for the team leaders. And the team leaders were responsible for each of the 5, each member of that 5-member group. So for us, during field trips, all we had to look was the team leader. Say, is your team in? Fine, good, let's go. Rather than, who's number 23? So it also helped because once we came back, we had a group presentation of what their experience was. And that, because this was a credit course, this was a 3-credit course, and we needed to put some activity to make it worth 3 credits. So the group presentation was a major part of that, where they would sit together to plan a presentation, and we had an evening presentation that was quite well attended with food and all that. And that came out really well because the group was really well designed to, look at it from day one. So they could choose their own topic. They would run the topic with Tricia and I would approve the topic or make some suggestions to how to change it. They'd come up with the presentation. And the presentations are fabulous. Look out, it might be coming out in YouTube anytime soon. The debriefing. 2 models of debriefing at the site every day to put the context in. And part of that was because when you have a discussion on, say, Jain philosophy and the history of it in India, like, whoa, what does this mean to me? Why should I care? That aspect of it. Or when you hear about terms like female feticide, what? I haven't heard of that. Or how come the contraceptive debate is not much more vigorous? Well, there's no debate. There's no objection. So people are okay with it. Those types of contexts really help. And we did a pre-departure orientation too. We also did a one-on-one debriefing with every member of the team after we came back. And I've heard from the students, and you can ask them when I leave the room, they all say that it's been fantastic. And that was based on our observation of every individual student about what are the characteristics we would like them to build. Tricia and I have been involved a lot in leadership development. So, what can we push? What extra reading, extra skill sets we would like them to have. We already talked about the team presentation. Continuity of future physicians. And this is sort of the interesting part because we knew these students from the 1600, 1601, 1602 onto this. So we sort of knew them. I've known David since he was a freshman. He's a senior now. Colin, he's a sophomore. I've known him since he came into the school. So these types of things, we got to know them better, of course, but that continuity really helped for us to give the perspective of who they are and what kind of development they've had in the school. And the last one, very strong partnership with the Learning Abroad Center. We had a little bit of a problem coming back. One of the immigration officials in Bangalore airport interpreted the immigration rules a little different. So some of our students were held back. So the Learning Abroad Center, the GPS Alliance was fabulous in helping us with this. They're also really good in the pre-departure thing, and I'll let Kathy talk a little more about that. What would we change? Maybe next year. We couldn't do it this year because we didn't have any alumni. So the next year we'll get our students to come and help with the pre-visit planning. Group flights, please. Even applying for visas as a group, so there's less headaches that way, because it's one headache you don't want to have people going in different parts of the world. And Kathy.
really hate that I have to use this thing, but I will, because I'm told to. I can be a follower. Okay. I'll keep my comments brief because I do really want to leave some time for questions, especially to give you the opportunity to talk to our students a bit more, since that's why we're all here. But I started working with this program, I think it was November of 2010, but actually this had, as you heard from Shiley, that this had been part of the discussion that he and Trish had been having for quite some time before that. Just to give a little bit of context in terms of what the relationship was between the Learning Abroad Center and this program, is this falls into a category that we now call collegiate/departmental, formerly called a custom program. And we changed the name very intentionally this past year because to really reflect, as you have heard, that this really is a labor of love, and it is owned and delivered and administered all from within the college or the department. And the Learning Abroad Center is there to help facilitate, to advise, to consult, to answer questions throughout that process. But the success of the program really does depend on the buy-in from not only the program leaders, but also their respective departments, because it does represent a great deal of time and energy and efforts. The program had started out initially as the Learning Abroad Center has a number of different models for these short-term faculty-led programs. And Tricia and Charlie had initially contacted us and wanted to run it as a global seminar, but it didn't work out as a global seminar because the global seminar model has a very strict rubric attached to it in terms of duration and no prereqs and things of that nature. So they fell into this collegiate departmental. And if you're interested, I do have a brochure that talks about all the different models that we have. So our role, in addition to some of the billing and registration and really the sort of unsexy side of study abroad that really nobody wants to deal with, I operated a great deal as a consultant. I mean, Tricia and I were on the phone quite regularly, on emails quite regularly, particularly in those visa application moments. But I also, as I learned about their program, I did a little bit of my own sleuthing. I knew that of the connection with the organization. I knew the University of Iowa was there, so I called the University of Iowa and just talked to my study abroad colleague there and said, what do you think? How are things going there? Do things work well with the organization? Because in spite of the fact that I respect the knowledge and expertise of our physician, I've seen a lot, and it really is dependent on the success of a program is dependent on a strong in-country partner, and fortunately, Iowa had some very positive things to say about it. Had I heard something negative, I would have consulted further with Tricia and Shiley about that. But fortunately, we didn't have to have that difficult conversation. Some other things that worked really well with this is, the Learning Abroad Center has a great deal of experience in administering and running these types of programs. But as you have heard, they knew their students best. So they knew how to structure the program in ways that would work. He talked about the team leaders. And that's something that the Learning Abroad Center just doesn't know because we deal with such a broad and diverse population. They were less aware of issues around health and safety and security and visa, and those types of things. So Trish and I were going back and forth, how to put a program budget together. What does that look like? What should be included? What's a reasonable cost for all of this? And that was really, really successful. They also, I wanted to mention, had, in addition to knowing most of the students, actually had the students write an essay for participation in this, which all too often we hear some program leaders who want to do a sort of first come, first serve, which kind of makes me bristle a bit because this is a big experience and it's very intense and it's good for students to go through that process of thinking about why do I want to do this? What do I want to get out of it? Also helps the program leaders to see sort of what the expectations are for the student. So we had this nice process where the students were doing an online application through us, but then Tricia was also collecting the essays and they were reviewing them as part of the process. I think you decided not to do personal interviews, and that can get tricky because of size and so on. But from my perspective, this has been one of the most enjoyable and best programs I've worked with because there was so much attention to the finer details in this, and we're looking forward to continuing it further. I did also want to mention part of the reason Tricia isn't here is because she is at the Forum on Education Abroad conference right now. Tricia has been instrumental and a key driver in the new development of the health standards for education abroad programs. There's nothing in our field that exists right now that says this is what's okay and this is what's not okay to do in the field, and it's really, really important. And so we're really excited to have Tricia on board to help establish those so other students can benefit. Get this off there.
Some of the future challenges we're going to have, replicating the model with new faculty. My chair has told me he's going to stone me if I go again next year. No. It's also the practical side of going every year, because I'm in clinical medicine. Every time I go, it's lost revenue for the program, and they're a little skeptical about taking that much time off. We have created a model which we think is going to work, where we're going to take a junior faculty. Fortunately for us, it's one of my residents who's been there and worked there to lead the team next year, and maybe partner with somebody in public health. We're waiting to see how that would go. Maybe take one of my senior residents who's been in practice for many years to be an added faculty / TA, like the second faculty model, because the local faculty are pretty strong. So that's one of the reasons. Model of sustainability, so that there's less headaches like we had this year, particularly around challenging situations, health and safety issues locally, those types of things. The last part, we want to explore a little more. Are we doing the right thing? Are we being very subjective on our experience with the students? We had one student from the University of Wisconsin who was with us, and that was because she was initially from at the University of Minnesota but took a transfer. She had been part of a future physicians course and went there. So is that appropriate or not? We still don't know. It made logistically a little bit of a headache. We're happy she was with us. We don't know if that should be a model going forward. We've had some interest from St. Olaf's, Carleton, and other schools which have a pretty strong pre-med coursework that they want to join us in this program. We don't know if we want to go that way. We want to hold it as much as possible for our folks. So that's something we're going to be looking at. And is there a better model of selecting future students? And with that, I'll open up for any questions. Okay, so there were two questions. The first one is if the students had an opportunity to interact with pre-med students in India. And the answer to that is no. Part of the reason being pre-med education in most countries is much different from what it is in here. A lot of people go into med school right out of 12th grade. There's not much of preparation in the pre-med, in a curricular way. So that was one of it. We did have some brief interactions with some local faculty from the med school there, and that helped some. And the second question was around other institution program. No, other institutions don't have a program like this. The other institutions go to this organization to do other programs. The University of Iowa program is around Indian studies. Cornell is around international development. Harvard is around public policy. The University of Western Australia is around architecture and Indian architecture. So it's much varied. This was the first unique one of that kind, where we are really talking about the social determinants of health and how do we look at that. So to summarize your question, what can we do for those students who go abroad anyway and do clinical work, and what can we do to discourage that? Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my quick 2 cents on this is more and more medical schools are aware of this, and they look at it and discourage it, which is a new trend. It used to be that some of the large programs in most medical school boasted of doing clinical work in other countries. Oh, I went and did a C-section. Were you trained to do one? No. Or a laceration repair? No, you're not trained. that's one part of it. So more and more medical schools are talking about it. In fact, they're looking at applications, say, so you went to Costa Rica. What did you do there? So if you say you did laceration repair, they have been asking questions. So I'm hoping this is a trend for the future, where there's a little more of that. So I think that will be the key, because if med schools are discouraging it, people will stop doing it. But besides that, I'll let the students handle it.
I think you have a very good point about it needs to be student driven as well. I think we have a very large responsibility for just putting those ideas out there that, hey, there are a lot of problems with this. And so as students, we're not entirely sure how best to do that. We were thinking about some sort of student group or some sort of student advocacy on that. But that's kind of an open question. I'd also say that in the Future Physician series was where I personally was first introduced to this idea, because I was very interested in global health coming in, and it was like the medical mission trip. Well, that's obviously the easiest way to get that sort of exposure. And I think Colin and I are both somewhat abashed that would even cross our minds at this point. But it's just the idea of getting those ideas out there to the students. I think we need to explore student-driven options.
And a little bit beyond the student-driven options, the thing that helped me the most in sort of transforming the way that of my thinking, in the beginning at least, is that we completed a program through the center that Tricia set up that sort of outlined ethics of working abroad and ethics of practicing medicine abroad for students. And it was a model that showed us examples and sort of like the worst case scenarios of these people getting rejected because they did do some of these terrible, unethical things abroad, I guess you can say. And while I think that the student perspective is the most important, and what our role is to get this information out there, especially to students taking the Future Physicians courses, but maybe requiring something like this online program that we completed would help, especially change the mindset.
Another thought is to try to change the mindset of a pre-med student interested in global health to have a more comprehensive view of health, to sort of the mindset that our trip had to focus on the social determinants of health, et cetera. I think if we can have that sort of shift from sexy hands-on medicine to the big picture difficult issues, then that'll sort of pull it in that direction also.
Not the same thing with Didactics. Why is that?
So the question is there a way to internationalize the medical curriculum so that physicians can move easily beyond boundaries? That's a very good question. It's very difficult to practice outside your state. I'm licensed in 4 states, and every state it was like pulling teeth. I had to prove them. I had the adequate training and all that. And you're right, there is a need to find that. The challenge can also be around, not all medical schools are created equal. So the curriculum changes a lot. And contextually also, probably the content material is much different than what we would study here. For example, one of my usual issues is if you open a textbook of common childhood diseases, it's completely different here than what you would see in India or other countries. So the emphasis becomes different. I remember a physician, a newly minted physician in India, commenting about interacting with a U.S. physician who was thrilled when they saw measles for the first time. Because if you haven't seen it, you don't know what it is. So your approach becomes different. The important part about it, even within medical education in this country, is that there's a really remarkable article in the NEJM in 2001 that showed that 4 out of 1,000 people who get sick in this country end up in an academic health center. Okay, 4 out of 1,000. 96% of our training occurs in academic health centers. So we're missing a whole lot of training here. So are we seeing the common things? Are we looking at the common things? Are we approaching the common things? We talk about a culture where we get a CAT scan first and then ask questions. It's common. I see that every day. So at least part of our mission from our department's viewpoint is there is good evidence that pre-med students who go on trips like this end up doing more primary care work. Hint, hint. But that's what we want to do. It's not just, can we look at becoming a primary, putting your clinical medicine perspective in context. Where does it fit in communities? Where does it fit in healthcare delivery? Where does it fit in public health? Those types of things. So I think that challenge of doing the certification is going to be impossible to bridge because of the monies involved. Licensing is a big moneymaker for different boards.
All right, everyone, this is Sonia. Thanks for